Good evening and welcome to the June 21st meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. We will begin this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance led by the Bauer family.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with request to speak cards. A reminder to everyone that request to speak cards should be completed and turned in to the clerk prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write the item number on your card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. And with that, we will go into our agenda. The first section, the general administration function. Part A, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the commission. I have no request to speak on items not on the agenda at this point. So we'll move to item B, correspondence and staff communication from the Planning Commission Secretary, Mr. Tilley.
Yes, just one quick note for scheduling purposes. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is July 5th. This is obviously right after July 4th holiday. Unless there's objections from the commission, we would endeavor to cancel that meeting and just have one meeting in July at our second regularly scheduled meeting in July, which would be July 19th. So unless there are strenuous objections to canceling that meeting, that's how we'll proceed.
Hearing none, I think we'll be okay. So we'll move to item C, disclosure of ex parte communications. Planning commissioners should disclose any communications they've had on the agenda items at this time. We'll start with Commissioner Austin.
None to report.
Vice Chair Castillo.
None to report.
Commissioner Vu.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Harrison.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Liebig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although it's on the consent agenda and the item is continued, I'd like to note that I attended a community meeting on agenda item number 2 regarding the Rivers 2 apartments. I've also had some additional follow-up with a couple of the community members on that item.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Liebig. I have nothing to report on ex parte communications. At this time, we will move into our consent agenda. Tonight, we have 3 items on our consent agenda. Item 1, consideration approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which if a commissioner would like to pull that off for a separate vote, I'm happy to do because I know we had some absences last time around. And then we have 2 items. Item 2, continued public hearing regarding plan development permit for the Rivers 2 apartments, which is staff is asking to have that item continued. And a public hearing regarding proposed conditional use permit for contractor's office and indoor storage area at 1013 Drever Street. The way we handled this last time around, I'd like to suggest we do the same. If any commissioners would like to pull an item for either discussion or for a separate vote, you can do that at any time. I will need to open the public hearing and take any comments that are submitted, which we don't have any at this moment, on items 2 and 3 because it is a public hearing. Then we'll close the public hearing and we'll go straight to a vote unless there's a desired discussion. So at this point in time, is there a desired discussion on any items?
Yeah, I'd like to pull item 1 just for a separate vote.
Very good. Any other requests for pulling for discussion or a separate vote? Very good. Then I will quickly open the public hearing. And at this point in time, I have no requests to speak on items 1, 2, or 3. With that, I will close the public hearing. And let's take the items in order. So if we can get a motion for item 1, consideration approval of the minutes.
I'll move approval of the June 7, 2018 minutes.
So moved by Commissioner Liebig. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Harrison. Let's do a roll call vote on this item, please.
Commissioner Liebig?
Aye.
Commissioner Vu?
Aye.
Commissioner Castillo?
Abstain.
Commissioner Austin?
Abstain.
Commissioner Harrison?
Aye.
Commissioner Sternfels.
Aye.
Thank you.
Items out 4-0 with 2 abstentions. We can now take items 2 and 3 together unless anyone has a concern or would like to split those out, and I'd be looking for a motion to approve staff recommendation on both items.
I'll move staff recommendations on items 2 and 3.
And I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Liebig, for the motion, Commissioner Austin for the second. We can do a voice vote on this one. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. Items 2 and 3 pass unanimously.
Just pardon me, Chair
Thank you.
Sternfels.
Please do.
Regarding item number 3, any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to City Council by filing a written appeal with the city clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. We'll now move to our regular agenda, item number 4. This is a workshop on draft Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock reuse master plan. Ms. Yancey.
Chair Sternfels, I need to recuse myself from this item.
Very well, Ms. Austin. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Ms. Austin? Hello. As part of the recusal, you should identify what the reason for the recusal is.
Thank you for clarifying, City Attorney. I'm going to recuse myself because I own property within a close proximity of the proposed development area.
Perfect, thank you.
Ms. Yancey, welcome. We're very glad to have you.
Thank you very much for having me this evening. I look forward to presenting a workshop to you on the Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock Reuse Master Plan. The Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock Reuse Master Plan began its work in 2015. In 2014, the city prepared a Pioneer Bluff transition plan. That was an early feasibility study that was conducted looking at the transition economics to transition the Pioneer Bluff District, which is south of Highway 50, north of the Barge Canal, and it's bounded by the UP Railroad line and Sacramento River. It looked at the transition economics and was attempting to determine if it was feasible to continue the course of action looking at transitioning the site from its current industrial uses into the long-planned riverfront mixed use that's been in the general plan since basically the city's incorporation. The conclusion of the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan was that the transition economics are incredibly fragile and that we needed to do additional work and that we should pursue preparing something that they referred to as a land use, transportation, and financing plan. In our terms, we would kind of consider that to be like a specific plan level document. We are not ready to do a specific plan level document. So in lieu of that, we've done a reuse master plan. That reuse master plan is a due diligence reference guide and a management tool. And part of what I'm going to walk you through this evening in the workshop is the due diligence that was conducted and then why a management tool is needed for a project of this scope and scale. The Reuse Master Plan is funded by a Strategic Growth Council grant. We got about $400,000 back in 2015. The deadline for this grant is July 13th, which means completing this workshop and completing the council's workshop on June 27th are requirements for the grant. Those are the last 2 pending requirements for the grant. We have done 3 public open houses. We've had over 300 attendees participate in the workshops. We had one every year. We've worked with staff, we've worked with property owners. In fact, I received a letter of support from the property owners earlier today, thanking staff for the work that they've done and expressing desire to continue working together. We've been coordinating with departments across the city, and we've worked with over 8 consultants to produce over 2,000 pages of technical material, which I'm sure you all read over the weekend and really enjoyed thoroughly. We're basically trying to overcome a lot of the transition challenges that occur in these areas. And so these transition challenges can basically be summarized into 3 groups. We have deindustrialization challenges, we have land development challenges, and building development challenges. In addition to all of these challenges, we must figure out how to balance the new bridges that are expected to come into this district, the flood setbacks, how are we going to activate our riverfronts and all of our new roadways that we're proposing with high-quality pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And then we do have something from the 2003 Parks Master Plan, which is an old concept for the Stone Lock District, which is effectively about a 100-acre Field of Dreams park, which would make the transition economics of this facility completely infeasible. So we've been looking at how to improve our break-even land use economics and balance all of these public and private interests and put together a plan that deals with deindustrialization activities, that sets a set of recommendations out for land development and sort of daylights some of the issues that we have in going vertical in this area. So the first issue that we have really in going vertical, besides the deindustrialization challenges and besides putting together the right set of improvement plans, is that we effectively do not have a market for this product type, and that is the most significant concern moving forward. We had a robust market assessment done as part of Volume 2, and it essentially concluded that of the development that's expected in our 4 waterfront districts, Washington, Bridge District, Pioneer Bluff, and Stone Lock, we're looking at about 10,000 new residential units and about 12 million square feet of office and commercial. That translates to about 100 years' worth of absorption for the residential and 300 years of absorption for commercial. So even if we manage to figure out how to deindustrialize all of Pioneer Bluff and retrofit the Stone Lock sector gate and build the right amount of improvements and our transition economics were spot on, we don't have market demand to build the units after we've done all of the work that we would typically do. So this is a huge problem. What we've decided to do is sort of say what we can get our arms around is perhaps we can take that timetable down and get to a 40-year development program. And so what you see in the table on this slide is what we consider to be a reasonable 40-year development program. And what you get at the end of that is about $3 billion worth of assessed value. So that's sort of the goal, the objective is to get at that $3 billion worth of assessed value. We have here in the exhibit the 5 main deindustrialization projects, priority projects for the city that are talked about in the plan: rail relocation, tank farm relocation, courtyard relocation, et cetera. We've made significant progress on figuring out how these would work. We had a workshop at the City Council at their last meeting about how the courtyard relocation might be phased. We've done some due diligence work and some feasibility analysis on rail relocation. We have an idea of what rail relocation would cost. We've already entered into agreement, the ports enter into agreement to demolish and remediate for the Shell tank farm location. So we've made significant progress in deindustrialization. As you can see, a lot of the progress that we would expect typically to come out of a master plan like this, new roads, new parks, et cetera, does not happen until at least 10 years in the future. There's a tremendous amount of activity that needs to be undertaken in terms of capital improvement projects, pre-planning activities, even just administrative activities that need to occur over the next decade to be ready for those capital improvement projects. Excuse me. One of the projects that I wanted to talk to you about here is the Stone Lock Facilities Floodgate Deindustrialization Project. And part of the reason why I want to focus on flood protection is that in the document, it really speaks to how flood protection sort of predetermines a lot of the work that's being done in the land development strategy. So where the flood protection setback is and what the flood protection solution is at this bulkhead really does affect the transition economics. And the goal of the transition economics in moving forward with the land development strategy is to add as much value to the one side of the ledger and to balance the public and private interest so that we don't keep adding costs. Because we could look at building beautiful roads and new beautiful park facilities, but that just adds the cost and we may not get the economic value to keep that break-even transition economics. So the first thing that we did was we noticed that the federally approved general reevaluation report for the bulkhead facility includes filling in that orange area with dirt. That would separate the Sacramento River from the deepwater ship channel. There are lots of issues associated with that: water quality, fish passage, recreation uses. So the first step that we took was saying that needs to go away. We need to look at a different alternative for the bulkhead. We looked at 4 alternatives through a bulkhead alternatives analysis, and we have come up with 2 that save about $35 million to the flood protection program and better support the transition strategies and adaptive reuse of the Stone Lock facility. We also looked at where the building setbacks would necessarily need to be in these areas. This is something that's done at a programmatic level by West Safka. They don't get down to this level, so we, in coordination with them, came to them and said, we'll do this analysis because we need to know how much buildable land that we have to make sure that we're getting that transition economics as refined as possible. And we worked with them, with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and the Army Corps of Engineers to look at what those improvements would look like, and we settled on these building setback recommendations that had been vetted with the regulatory agencies and approved by the City Council and the West Safka Board. So with those two improvements, we began to understand that we can apply an urban park standard, which is to put as much of our park space in these undevelopable areas. And that's what you have here, is a revised Central Park site plan. It moves away from the plan that was in the 2003 Parks Master Plan, and it focuses as much as possible on the area that surrounds the Sacramento River and the Barge Canal. It reuses the Stone Lock facility, and in this case, instead of taking up almost 100 acres of developable land, we're only consuming 9. So that's really helping with our transition economics. This programming is based on the work that's being done by the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. We coordinated closely with them, and we used the same consultant so that this could be integrated. And a lot of this programming that's recommended here came out of the surveys that were done for that effort. So now that we have a beautiful park that's built and integrates in the flood protection improvements, we needed to find a street network that not only would support the urban mixed-use development objectives, but also get people to these facilities. So we presented to the City Council in January 4 mobility network alternatives, and the City Council gave us approval to proceed with this one. This one is being used in the master plan. We used it to develop cross-sections, which I'll talk about in a second. We also used it to with the Broadway Bridge. We're integrating it with the Broadway Bridge. This street network integrates nicely in with the 4 alignments that are contemplated in the Broadway Bridge feasibility study, and it's being used for the traffic analysis associated with the Broadway Bridge, so we're coordinating with that effort as well. This is the layered network. One of the standards that's talked about in Volume 2 is the standard to ensure that we have complete streets in the community, and one of the missions that this Planning Commission has is to ensure that plans that come before them do incorporate complete streets. We have taken a complete layered network approach here. Not every street is meeting every user, but every user's needs are being met throughout the network. So for example, there are no bike lanes on South River Road. There are no bike lanes on South River Road from Stone Boulevard, which is located, here to 15th Street, for 2 reasons. One, that's where streetcars are going to go, and bicycles and streetcars do not interact very well together. 2, we wanted to keep that right-of-way as narrow as possible, to keep it as urban and transit-oriented as possible. We would have to widen the road, and if we widen the road, then our block sizes get too small, and then we can't have things like parking garages in them because parking garages require certain sizes. So then we would have to look at eliminating roads, and then we begin to lose the grid, and then there's all these other effects. So we really tried to be cognizant of how we were integrating all of these different issues. But back to the bikes issues, even though there are no bike lanes on South River Road, we are proposing a separated bidirectional cycle track on Jefferson. We're proposing bike lanes on Rail Street, which is the new north-south street that was included in the grid, and then we also have the bicycle path that's on the trail. So bicycles have the 4 north-south connections that are proposed in Pioneer Bluff. Bicycles have high-quality improvements on 3 of them. Pardon me. One last thing. This was used to create the cross-sections that were also included in the report. Those cross-sections have yet to go to council, so they're going to be seeing those for the first time, as well as you all. But we did preview some of the key cross-sections, the Rail Street cross-section, the Jefferson cross-section, and the South River Road cross-section to the Transportation and Mobility Infrastructure Commission earlier this year. Again, I talked earlier about we were trying to coordinate our active transportation with parks, so this is the Jefferson cross-section that I was giving you a preview for, where it shows the bidirectional cycle track. We also incorporated the streetcar stops. We looked at incorporating as much improvements into the existing Jefferson Baskill Bridge. We have 5 bridges that we're looking at with this project, and the Broadway Bridge Two new bridges across the Deepwater Ship Channel, improvements to the Baskill Bridge on Jefferson to allow for bicycle and pedestrian traffic. That's that old rail bridge that people walk on, but there's no safe facility for them to go onto. And then a new bridge. The bridge that I wanted to call your attention to is this circle here. That's contemplated in the Sacramento Riverfront Master Plan. It recommends a non-automobile bridge, and so we're recommending that we investigate that further and potentially as a streetcar loop. So the document itself does not have CEQA attached to it. It is really, as I said earlier, it's a due diligence document. We're looking at trying to figure out how to integrate all of these things and ensure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck and that we're investing wisely so that we can really get a return on the money that we're spending transitioning this facility. We've created phasing diagrams that take us through the rest of the general plan. This is the phasing diagram for the first 5 years. We've done a lot of due diligence work. We've done preliminary engineering, and one of the sites is even shovel-ready. I wanted to kind of take a minute to walk you through everything that might be happening in the next 5 years. Pardon me. I'm going off script, so let me catch online there. So at the Stone Lock facility, we have a Phase 1 improvement that talks about securing and doing a structural retrofit of the buildings that are going to remain, doing demolition and cleanup, improving the rails and adding bi-level lighting, and effectively creating a public safety and access plan so portions of the Stone Lock facility can be accessible to the public. At the bulkhead, I spoke earlier about looking at new alternatives. We're going to continue our due diligence on the co-benefits, water quality, fish passage, and ecosystem enhancements. We're going to continue to work with our partners at West Safka on that issue. We're going to go to the City Council and ask them to select a design for the improvements to the Baskill Bridge. We also received a $300,000 grant from the US EPA to develop a brownfield toolbox for this facility. As you saw in Volume 2, Pioneer Bluff is essentially a brownfield, and so we're going to need to take a district-wide approach to clean up in the district. And then the last thing I want to discuss with the Commission was something that's on the Council's strategic agenda. It's called a Riverfront Investment Strategy. There are about $750 million worth of transition expenses to get this project going. 2/3 of that are regional projects. These regional projects are not under control of this master plan. So part of the Riverfront Investment Strategy is going to be identifying those projects that need to be under control. What are precursory projects? So you saw a lot of the projects that we presented in relationship to the new streets or the new Central Park, those require rail relocation happening. All those new streets require tank farm relocation happening. So one of the objectives that we have with the Riverfront Investment Strategy is to bring those under one uniform umbrella, make sure those projects are prioritized, and make sure that they're optimized for real estate development. Our transition economics are so fragile that we cannot handle a suboptimal outcome of any of those regional projects. Adding $50 million worth of expenses or lowering the vision will essentially cause this project to break apart and it will no longer work. So we're being very cognizant of that and we're recommending a proactive approach to decision-making. And so we'll be working with the council and staff over the next few months, maybe the rest of the year, to figure out what that looks like and how we might develop a decision-making process that would manage those. After that's done, I imagine we're going to be looking at what's the appropriate level of CEQA analysis that needs to be done with this document, and it likely will be a programmatic EIR that captures those projects that we identify as needing to be governed by the master plan. That concludes my very detailed presentation, but if you have any questions about the document, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yancey. Before we go into Commissioner comments, we actually had some requests to speak from members of the public, so I think we'll go ahead and do those first. Then we can come back and have a discussion here. So I had two requests to speak. The first one is Ms. Jameson. Good evening. Good to see you.
Good evening. Good to see everybody. Just a few things. Number one, this was a very large document, and I did not have much time to go through it, and I think it's just a little frustrating that such a significant document has not been given much time for public review. So that's a little frustration I think some of the public members have. The second item is on the environmental issues. I do cleanup of contaminated sites for a living, and so I kind of focused in on this issue. There are significant petroleum and non-petroleum issues potentially in this area, and I think the city just needs to be very careful with the development and ensuring that, particularly for vapor mitigation, that the contamination is dealt with properly, and if it's not removed, that the buildings are constructed with the proper vapor mitigation, to not rely on passive barriers for vapor intrusion, but to use more active and passive venting methods. I think that there's just a lot of issues that, I know this is very preliminary, but to do your due diligence, so there is no harm for the occupants of the buildings. Then my third question is on, I think I wrote down page 4, I think that was of the executive summary. For part 2, there was a statement about the Broadway Bridge and how if something happens, then it will cost $100 million. And I guess what I did not understand is how will it not cost $100 million, and really what is that, how will it cost $100 million for the city? So those are my questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jameson. We'll probably let Ms. Yancey come up at the end and make any comments you'd like to respond to the public comment. Ms. Flint, you are up next. Welcome.
Thank you. I also have not had time to go through the entire document, but a couple things popped out. One is that you're bypassing CEQA on a couple of these things, and it's specifically being written so that it doesn't bring CEQA up to the front. I didn't bring my paperwork. I forgot it at home. That's what happens when you get old. But anyway, the CEQA information to me was troubling, and I don't want to see us bypass anything, because this is information and a project that I don't object to at all. But if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. We have to do the right cleanup, we have to have the right setbacks, and we have to have the right flood protection. And I know this is a preliminary document, but it's going to the city council on next week. And is it going for final approval or just draft approval? That I wasn't sure about. So it's a lot to take in. And again, I don't think you've done a lot of community outreach. I did attend the one Stone Lock event you had here, but there weren't that many people. I don't know how we're going to get out this information to people. I know the city's trying very hard, but it's not getting there. There are a lot of people watching online, but events like that don't go online for people to review. So just something to think about.
Thank you, Ms. Flint. I do not have any other requests to speak cards at this time, so Ms. Yancey, if you would like to come back up, because I'm sure between the public comment and our questions, we'll need you there for a few minutes.
Would you like me to address the comments
Yeah,
from
if
the
you
public
wouldn't
now?
mind taking a moment to address some of the public comments.
Of course. So I think the comments related to the brownfield mitigation, I think they're point on. We are beginning just the process of investigation. One of the recommendations in terms of spending the $300,000 is putting together a district-wide master plan for cleanup. We have reached out to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They were our first people to reach out to because of the benzene distribution information that we were able to collect during this process, where clearly groundwater contamination is a significant issue. And so we confirmed with them that cleanup standards would have to be to mixed use or residential, that they would be cleaning up to zoning, so that it would not be permitted to clean up to an industrial standard. In relationship to the active vapor mitigation, I think that's something we'll just have to continue to look at, but I don't have any particular comments related to that. In terms of the comment related to the Broadway Bridge, this effectively has to do with the work that we're doing with the City of Sacramento. Right now, the Broadway Bridge is considered a citywide facility, and as such, the district itself, those transition economics where we take the local costs and then we look at what the expected value is, and do they pay for each other effectively. Right now, the Broadway Bridge is not part of that equation. And it's not part of that equation because we're effectively saying it does not serve just the district, it serves the city, it serves the region. It is a regional facility. If for some reason we are not able to advance the projects as we are proposing to, for example, if we're not able to advance rail relocation and we want to, but we do advance a tank farm relocation, and we're saying, okay, we have an access issue here where the rail is a barrier, but we are ready for redevelopment. The Broadway Bridge may be the way to overcome that accessibility limitation. In that case, then it is serving the district's economic development objectives, and then about half of the cost of the Broadway Bridge would be transferred over to the district. And then the district would then no longer have break-even economics because it cannot handle that additional cost.
Can you be clear in terms of this? I mean, you're talking about in your overall funding.
I'm talking about a feasibility analysis.
Right, so it's not actual dollars that are transitioning to some district, it's just in your analysis of cost versus benefits, you're not including the costs of the Broadway Bridge into your assessment, but
The
should
cost
that
remains the
situation
same.
change, you would want to because you made certain choices in your analysis that were based on certain criteria.
That is correct. So it is, the Broadway Bridge remains the same cost. It just, who is responsible? And effectively, where this is important is, we will be asking the property owners at some point to pass us a community financing district. That only works if we have that break-even transition economics. If something tilts in the wrong way, as I said at the end of my presentation, suboptimal outcome of these regional projects could decimate the transition economics. This is one that has that potential to occur.
Follow-up question, just real quick. Just real quick, Katie, does the timeline for cleanup contamination, as one of the public comments mentioned, fall in line with the timeline that we have in place for these different phases of the projects?
It does.
Okay.
All those things were taken into consideration with the recommended improvements to the mobility network. I would also just like to mention that certainly we can always do a better job with public outreach, but we did have 3 public meetings, one in 2016, one in 2017, and one in 2018. I've also presented this material to several of the commissions, including this commission in 2016. We've been to the Economic Development Housing Commission, we've been to the Parks Commission, the Arts Commission, we've been to the Transportation Mobility Infrastructure Commission, we've been to the Port Commission, and we've been to the West Safka Board. So I do hear the commenters' concerns, but we have made an effort to sort of disseminate this information as best as possible. The last thing I'd like to talk about is the CEQA comments. The grant that we received specifically precludes us from doing CEQA analysis. We had in our grant work program a line item that says this work product cannot trigger CEQA analysis, meaning that it has to be just recommendations. And it is just meant to operate as a very high-level preliminary document. So we are not trying to side-skirt CEQA. It is a part of our grant requirement. The last thing is that, yes, it is going to the council as a draft and a workshop. We are asking the council to approve it only for submission to meet the grant requirement, because the grant is due on July 13th. And so we are asking for a workshop and then approval to submit the document to satisfy our grant requirement. That does not mean the document's done. It does not mean that we couldn't take comments from this board and take comments from the city council and at a later date incorporate those or make changes to the recommendations that are included in here. I don't expect that we would be asking the city council for ultimate approval until we've completed the riverfront investment strategy.
Could you just speak to, at some point down the line with right development, there will be some level of CEQA analysis. So could you just kind of
Absolutely. The document says,
that?
the document says that we're recommending that a specific plan be done around 2025, when we think a lot of these issues have been resolved. And certainly that will have a CEQA document attached to it. But we're also contemplating doing a programmatic EIR sooner than that, once we figured out which projects we absolutely have to include. Flood protection, rail relocation, courtyard, all those projects are not governed by this plan. We're going to be asking the city council, do you want us to govern them by this plan? And then once we have an answer to that question, we can do programmatic analysis for environmental clearance.
Perfect. Thank you. Vice Chair Castillo?
In terms of the community, obviously, community input is important for a project like this, which I think will impact the entire city, particularly with traffic and new developments that occur. You said that when you go before the city council, you're asking for a preliminary approval to be able to submit this grant.
Yes.
That doesn't preclude us from actually holding more community meetings and receiving more community input. Is that something that's planned down the line to be able to actually host more?
No,
community
honestly,
meetings?
I'm taking a vacation after I get this submitted to the.
I just
to
want to make sure we're on the
program, so-
record, ensuring that the community is still able to provide input.
Yeah.
And be engaged and, moving forward, even after the city council decides to approve a preliminary plan.
Absolutely. The only project that is said and done, sort of is shovel-ready, is the Barge Canal Trail project, which we have already done environmental clearance on. We already had those findings that were made at the city council. That is the only project that I would say is signed, sealed, delivered.
Wonderful. So I know, did you have other questions or comments at this point, or you want me to come back to you?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Commissioner Vu?
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. This is going to be a long process, right? And when do you think the first EIR would drop? In about 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, I would say that, like, once we have a mastery of what projects needed to be included in it, then absolutely. And I think we would be able to preview that time frame in about 6 months. We'd have a better sense of what that actually looks like in about 6 months.
Okay, great. In regards to the cost of the cleanup along Pioneer Bluff, this is maybe way too early, but is there a general grasp of what the cost of that would be and who would be paying for that?
I can answer the second half of your question. So I don't have a cost estimate for the environmental cleanup, but the responsible parties would be responsible. And so the responsible parties are, as we can tell, Shell, Buckeye, and some other minor contamination has occurred. And so we've been working with 2 consulting firms, Ninu and Moore, and SCS engineers to be able to understand that better. This was just a disclosure of sorts.
Right.
In terms of what's contained in the volumes.
Okay, great. Second question, and my wife would be very upset if I don't ask this. What are the opportunities to keep some open space along the Stone Lock area? There's a significant amount of wildlife out there, a lot of trees. There's definitely a benefit to the community to keep open space and to support wildlife. And I think we are more than capable of blending our housing needs along with keeping open space and protection of wildlife. This definitely will not be the final plan, of course, but what opportunities are there to still make changes to this, or something to that?
Well, I think it's important to note that the document actually talks to the amount of land that's zoned for open space, and it's somewhere in the order of like 40 acres, so that's not an insignificant amount of land that's been zoned for open space. In Stone Lock District alone, along the waterfront, there's 13 acres that have been put in perpetuity for open space. So everything that's near the setback levee, everything that's water root of that setback levee is in perpetuity open space. I think your question has more to do with those areas shown in yellow that say future development sites. Would that be correct, sir? So I think this is when we get back to, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but every acre that we take out of development, we threaten that break even for the transition economics. So we would have to be looking at what the costs were for reserving additional developable land for open space. I should also point out that the general plan that was approved in November of 2016, is that correct, David? Did zone all of this as something called mixed-use neighborhood commercial, so the entire site is zoned for development. So in some sense, I think this is a nice balance of what the general plan says in terms of the development that's supposed to occur and what we have set aside and designated for open space and parks uses.
Commissioner Harrison?
Yes, I have a question about the bulkhead. Can you go to that picture that you had up earlier, please?
This one, sir?
Yes, and I know this is a draft and it's a work in progress. By the way, thank you for your work. This is, I can tell, a lot of hours put in, so I really appreciate that. I was just looking at the top photograph of that bulkhead, and honestly, I would just kind of like you to explain how that works, because it looks very confusing to me.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. So I hope I don't put anybody to sleep. Okay, so the way that it works is that the Sacramento River is much higher than the Deepwater Ship Channel. And so the wall that you see there, that's essentially 12 stop logs that are stacked on top of each other. What happens in a high water event is the Sacramento River gets to be about 18 feet taller than the Deepwater Ship Channel, even with tidal influx. It's pretty high. And so we need to keep that water from spilling into the Deepwater Ship Channel and effectively flooding the city, because that's what would happen if that happened. So right now, there's this wall that's there. That wall leaks. It's not seated properly, and water gets through it all the time. The fish can't get out but people can't get in there and enjoy it, and the amount of water that's leaking in there it's pretty insubstantial, and it only happens in high water events, so there's not a lot of water quality that happens farther down in the deep water ship channel. What we're proposing is to take that wall out, to take those stop logs out, to put them back in their little basin that you see there, and leave them there permanently, keeping them for, rainy day if anything really happens that we need to pull them out again, and either do one of two things. One, we would retrofit this eastern sector gate, and we would raise the height to meet the freeboard, so height requirements that are necessary for flood protection. There's also freeboard that needs to occur to the north and the south of that, so we would raise it and turn it into a mechanical levee effectively, and it would allow us to open that gate if we wanted to let fish through, or if we wanted to let some water in from the Sacramento River to improve the water quality down the Deepwater Ship Channel. There's also some scientific hypothesis that we can grow fish food in the Deepwater Ship Channel and then flush it down to feed the Delta smelt. So there's lots of co-benefits associated with moving water. That's one of the alternatives. The other alternative is just to the west of that sector gate to build a new flood wall. And that flood wall would have culverts in it that would allow us to effectively do the same thing that opening the gates would. And so that is in comparison to either leaving the wall in place in perpetuity, which is one of the solutions, or filling the entire site in with dirt.
Okay,
I hope that answered your question, sir.
thank you, yes.
Commissioner Liebig.
I'm really actually happy you brought up those bulkhead. That was actually one of my comments. The concepts included in the recommendations, nope, that's not the one. Something about the level of detail included in this, I very much appreciated, especially that one. Not too many people know the concept of improving water quality in the port. The idea that the city is interested in improving water quality in the port for recreation purposes. That area gets a lot of algae in it, and it'd be nice to kind of flush it out. That algae is really important for the Delta smelt farther down the river. So the idea of actually kind of helping flush it out serves two purposes. So the alternative shown is, I'm actually very happy to see it, and I'm actually really happy that somebody was listening to a little fish biologist maybe a year or two ago. So I was actually shocked. I won't say happy, I was shocked. So I'm very happy to see some of the alternatives that were included in here, and the level of thought is impressive. I do think the concepts included in this, and it's concepts, these are all just recommended concepts, will help revitalize this area. And it also includes key concept of the general plans that I heard over and over in some of the public meetings, like the Central Park. And the idea that this is a cherished area by the city, even though it's an industrial area. They want to see this, and they want to see access. And so I think this does a lot of that as well. There are significant public and private funding coordination needs required for this to pull it off. And as you mentioned over and over, it's a fragile process. So it's a long plan, and but you can't get through there without having the plan. So again, thank you for laying it out and being honest about the obstacles that we're going to have to overcome. It was a little hard to get through some of it. It was a lot of material. The approaches to it, I'm not sure I fully understand. I'm sure the city council will be working on it more about like how can we possibly take this into chunks, but it's difficult to take things into chunks when you're talking about contaminated soil and rail relocation. So I'm sure staff has a lot of work ahead of them to figure that out, and then funding mechanisms to do that, because usually it's the development that pays for that, but you kind of need to do that first.
Everything's front-loaded, yeah.
Yeah, which makes it very difficult. And then, of course, some of the areas have development restrictions as a result of contaminated soil, which further inhibit some of the development. So to your note about where people can live and what buildings can go there, there are some restrictions of what can go where. Third, and it's a lot of information. In my note I wrote, it's a dense summary of information, but it can be used for the environmental analysis. So this was in no way just something that we could read, take note of, and then put it on the shelf. This is going to be valuable information to be pulled into your programmatic EIR. And so, in effect, I think you've done a good job of laying out what is possible in the area, the risks, as well as the groundwork for how we can save money for doing the environmental work in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Yancey. Just a couple quick questions from me. The first is on tank farm relocation, because we've kind of mentioned it a few times. It's kind of in here a little bit. I know, like, last several years, there was kind of all this focus and effort around how are we going to relocate the tanks that are there, and then we had a pretty big property owner change that kind of changed that equation. And then I'm kind of thinking about 10 years from now, 15 years from now, shift from combustion engines to electric vehicles and hydrogen and everything else. And I mean, is the strategy to still think about needing to relocate versus things just changing?
So one of the things I did not include, and you can thank me for that later, in this document was the analysis that we did about storage capacity in the region. We did look at what projected storage capacity is. It's very difficult. You ask 1,000 people, you get 1,000 opinions. But we did look, and it appears for the near-term future, meaning the next 10 years, that we will have to relocate the facility, that there will not be a reduction enough based on just current trends, which of course could change, to actually eliminate the facility, much like Shell was eliminated. And so we unfortunately are trying to figure out how might we finance something like that, what would be the negotiations that would occur. And so that was our first step, was just, is removal on the table, or are we stuck with relocation based on what the region's storage capacity is? And it appears that we are firmly on the relocation path, and I imagine we'll be revisiting that one more time, probably with a team of experts. But at our preliminary level, that's where things are, that we're going to have to look at relocation.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, and this is probably just for my own nerding out more than anything, but you've talked a lot about in this presentation about kind of the break-even point and all these assumptions you made to get there. I think one of the realities is that we never end up building things the way we thought we would. So can you talk a little bit about what assumptions you included about, like discount rate or?
Absolutely.
I'm just interested in knowing more than anything, because.
We were very conceptual in our economics. So the sort of the places to get off the freeway that you're talking about are built into some of the recommendations. So if you look, the one that I like to talk about in particular is, if you look at where we discuss happening with South River Road or Rail Street, there is a discussion in the document that says, due to the environmental contamination, we may not be able to build those roads for another 20 years. And based on emerging trends in transportation, do we need streetcar? Or do we need this other road? Or are we appropriately programming? Maybe it's not bicycles anymore that people are using. I don't know, maybe we're being pushed around on strollers by bears. I mean, who knows what the possibilities hold? That's an old reference to a movie, sorry. But who knows what the future holds? And so what is in the document is a recognition that this is the best plan, these are the best concepts to make everything work together. But in particular, before we go spend $55 million on a streetcar extension, before we relocate a road and build a new road, should we be checking in to make sure that the economics still work? Should we be checking to make sure that the policies still work, that the technology still works, that we're still achieving our objectives? Or if for some reason, let's say all of Stone Lock builds out as single-family residential, I don't think the council will let that happen, but let's say that does. We have a change in council leadership and that does happen. Why would you build streetcar to that? So we have built in sort of these check-in points or get off the freeway points. And really what we've tried to do with this document is focus on what do we think will reasonably happen in the next 10 years? What do we need to investigate and fully understand and then do SQL analysis on and do additional preliminary design and find funding for in the next 10 years that advances the general plan objectives, but still lets us tinker with the ultimate vision or tinker with some of the big ticket items that are set off in the future. So we didn't get into the discount rates or, what we're looking at performance. I think you probably saw in there that the break-even point is less than 5%, and developers don't build things for less than 5%. In terms of profit. Unless you're the city, then you might build it for less than 5%. But we really sort of tried to focus instead on getting the economics precise or well-documented and sort of said, no, let's focus on what are the policy points that we might say, we need to revisit this or we need to revisit that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from Ms. Yancey? Wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation tonight.
Thank you guys very much for helping me meet my grant requirement.
It's our pleasure. We're excited to learn about this. All right, so we will move to the general administration function, part 3, informal discussion. Mr. Tilley, anything further for us this evening?
No.
Commissioners? All right, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.